Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving into a novel that does something truly audacious. It's called What Light Was, and it takes two of the most iconic couples in literary history, separates them by a whole century, and then makes this incredible argument that they lived the exact same life.
So the novel doesn't start with a hero or a villain. Nope. It opens with this line, spoken by Death, who's imagined as this kind of chain-smoking observer. And this isn't just a cool stylistic choice. It completely frames the entire story. It tells us right from the get-go that we're about to see these lives unfold not from a normal human perspective, but through the eternal, maybe even indifferent eyes of forces like death and time.
And this, right here, is the novel's massive experiment. It puts two pairs of literary superstars into a kind of historical echo chamber. And the argument isn't just that their lives were similar, it's that they were literally this same story playing out all over again, a repeating pattern of pure genius and absolutely devastating personal tragedy. So, who exactly are these couples at the heart of this literary time machine? The whole novel just jumps back and forth between two incredible and, incredibly different periods in history. Okay, so here are our two parallel worlds. On one hand, you've got the Shelleys, Percy and Mary, right at the center of the Romantic Rebellion, creating Frankenstein in a Europe that's still just reeling from Napoleon. Then, boom, 100 years later, you have the Fitzgeralds, Scott and Zelda. They are the glittering, self-destructive king and queen of the Jazz Age, writing The Great Gatsby on the French Riviera. The book's whole structure is built on this constant back and forth, showing us how a moment of deep despair for Mary is mirrored in a moment of soaring triumph for Scott, and then right back again. So you're probably wondering, how on earth does the author pull this off? Well, it's through this fascinating technique called a dialogue novel. The entire book is pieced together from the real letters, the real journals, and the actual writings of all these people. The author basically acts like a literary DJ, sampling a line from one of Scott Fitzgerald's letters and mixing it with a passage from Mary Shelley's diary. It creates this conversation that never actually happened, but wow, does it feel completely real. So where does this wild story even begin? For both couples, it kicks off with pure rebellion. The novel shows us how their legendary love stories were basically forged in the fire of scandal, a shared defiance of the world they were in. Yeah, both of these relationships started like a supernova. I mean, at just 16 years old, Mary Shelley runs off with a married man. That was an enormous scandal for her time. Fast forward a century, and Scott and Zelda literally become the living embodiment of the Jazz Age's reckless glamour. They turn their entire lives into this public spectacle of love, ambition, and yeah, more scandal. And this telegram from Scott to Zelda, it just perfectly captures that first, intoxicating high. Everything is a game, everything is possible. It's this feeling that they could actually rewrite reality itself. And the novel's most brilliant move is to show that the Shelleys, 100 years earlier, were running on that exact same defiant, world-changing energy. But here's the turn. The novel argues that this brilliant, blinding light was completely inseparable from a deep, creative darkness. For every single one of those exhilarating highs, there was a crushing low. And it's in that darkness, the book suggests, that their most immortal masterpieces were actually born. And this is maybe the novel's most challenging idea. It's this argument that their great works weren't created in spite of all their suffering, but because of it. The novel draws a direct, almost brutal line connecting personal tragedy straight to artistic immortality. I mean, the novel takes us right into the heart of Mary Shelley's unimaginable grief. After losing multiple children, she has a miscarriage so severe that Percy literally saves her life by putting her in a bath of ice. And in the novel's telling of it, death isn't some metaphor. He's a character standing right there in the room, smoking a cigarette, just watching her. And then, in this absolutely stunning jump, the novel cuts from Mary's physical agony to F. Scott Fitzgerald's emotional collapse a century later. He's on the French Riviera, totally trapped in what he calls an unholy depression, trying to write his masterpiece. The novel basically says that his disillusionment is a direct echo of her grief. That tap, tap, tap of his typewriter, it isn't the sound of creation, it's the sound of a dream dying. So, you see what's happening here, right? This is the absolute core of the argument. Frankenstein comes out of Mary Shelley's waking dream during a dark, stormy summer filled with personal loss. And The Great Gatsby is born from Scott Fitzgerald's unholy depression and the total wreckage of his marriage. The novel just insists that these masterpieces were not bolts of lightning from a clear sky. They were exorcisms, art created to cast out personal demons. So, where does this shared story of light and darkness finally lead? Well, the novel's last act dives into the tragic, intertwined fates of both couples, and it asks this chilling question: what is the ultimate price of genius? The book presents their endings as this tragic, inescapable echo. Percy Shelley drowns in a storm at sea. 100 years later, Scott Fitzgerald dies of a heart attack, his fame pretty much gone. And in maybe the most haunting parallel of all, Zelda Fitzgerald dies in a fire at a psychiatric hospital. The novel's final point is that they were marked for greatness, and that mark was a kind of curse, a fire that was just destined to burn incredibly bright and then burn out completely.
And this phrase from the novel, doubled stuff of mirrored life. That's the key to the whole thing. The book's final and most audacious claim is that these aren't two separate stories at all. They are one timeless, repeating story about the very nature of creativity. A story where brilliant light just cannot exist without profound darkness, where genius and tragedy are really just two sides of the same cursed coin.
So in the end, the novel leaves us with this haunting and frankly deeply unsettling question. Is great art born from great suffering? Is there a terrible price for genius? And were the Shelleys and the Fitzgeralds just two couples a century apart who were forced to pay that price in full? It's a question that challenges our whole understanding of creativity, and it's one that this incredible novel really forces us to confront.